Tennessee. Girl down on my knees. These little words I begin to sing. I've been working on
Hey guys, Drew here with upTOP Overland, bringing you another installation video. Today we are going to be going over an alpha rack for an F-150/Raptor. This will fit the first and second generation Raptors. It will not fit the new 2022 Plus Raptors. So let's get right into it. What we're gonna have in this package is quite a few things. So we're gonna have our armor, which is gonna be our outer panel. We're gonna have our inner groove tech that will come pre-installed with these factory threaded inserts. This customer opted for all stealth black. However, if you guys ordered a color match option, one or both of these might be a different color. From there, we're gonna have 4 2-stud bases. We're gonna have 2 1-stud bases. We're gonna have our middle and rear feet, which are ambidextrous, so there's gonna be 4 identical feet. And then we're gonna have 2 feet, these will be for the front. We'll have our master hardware pack, and then we'll have some load bars, which I have on the bench behind me. What we're gonna do to get this started is we'll open this hardware pack, and we're gonna go ahead and get all of our load bars installed into our groove tech first, and then we'll talk about attaching the feet after that. All right, so we've talked about what's included in the package. Now we've gone ahead and laid out the 7 load bars that are included with this kit and our groove tech on either side. We've also gone ahead and staged all of our bolts. So let's talk about the bolts first. This here is the last load bar. This is the end of our groove tech. The end of this groove tech can be noted by looking for this approximately 2x1 rectangular hole cut out in the rear. Conversely, the front is going to have a little notch here and a triangle cut out, and those are pass-throughs for plugs on our quick wire harnesses. So that's how you know your orientation is correct. So now that I know that this is my last load bar, you can see I've got some hex bolts, some lock washers, and a flat washer set up here on this last bar, and that came out of hardware bag 8001.1. It says first and last load bar. Everything else, so basically bar 6 through bar 2, is going to be a button head with a lock washer, and that came out of hardware bag 8001.2, all other load bars. Then one more time here at the front, we still have those hex bolts, the lock washers, and the flat washers, again out of bag 8001.1. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna take this groove tech and I'm gonna go ahead and get it started on a few of these load bars, and then I'll go do the opposite on this side. It's important to note that the protrusions that you see on your groove tech, the little nipple, if you will, is going to face to the inside of the rack. So when I take this, I want to flip it that way. That way it's flush on the outside. And there's not really anything fancy to this. I'm just gonna pick a load bar that I like, and I'm gonna go ahead and get a couple of turns on these bolts here. You might have to adjust your load bars in so you can bring everything up properly. And then I'll get another couple of turns here. And nothing is tight yet. We just basically want to hang this side, get some balance like you can see here. And then I'm gonna go do the opposite on that side. Go ahead and start the bolts for every single one of your load bars, but don't tighten anything down yet. We're gonna talk about that next. So all of our bolts are started. I now have 2 tools. I have a 7/16 socket for the first and last load bars, and I have a 5/32 Allen wrench for all of the other load bars. Let's talk about getting the rack square. So all of your load bars are going to install into the slots that exist on the groove tech, and you've got adjustability front and back on these. In order to get them square, you need to make sure that they're even from side to side. These 2 sides are cut as a mirror image of one another. So the easiest way to think about this is if it's locked out on one corner of the slot on both sides, then it's going to be truly square. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna push this last load bar all the way to the back of the rack, and I'm gonna hold it in place as I get this tightened down. From here, we'll go pick one more load bar that we want to lock in place. That way we know that both sides are square. But again, all I'm doing here is just pushing this last load bar all the way back in the slot itself to ensure that that's locked in. I have pretty significant OCD, so what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna go ahead and move all of the load bars to the back of the slot. That way the spacing is a little bit more even between bars. And ultimately, this customer isn't loading up any gear right away, so it doesn't really matter the placement of the load bars itself. We just want to make sure that they are even from side to side. So I'm going to go down this entire side, tightening all the load bars at the back of the slot, the back of the rack, but I'm going to leave that first load bar with the hex bolts loose, and I'll talk about why we're doing that here in just a minute. But I'm going to go ahead and finish tightening all of these load bars, and I'll be back with you in just a minute. At this point, we have the last all the way through the second load bar fully tightened down. This front load bar is still loose. I can wiggle it back. It's not super loose, but it is loose enough that I can still wiggle it. The reason that we've left that loose is we're going to be installing a light bar on this customer's vehicle. So I want to have a little bit of adjustability once I get it up on the truck. So to not have to do that work twice, I'm leaving this one loose. If you guys are not installing a light bar, you can go ahead and tighten this. I would recommend tightening it in the forwardmost position, as that's going to give you the quietest ride. However, if you are installing a light bar of any sort, I would also recommend leaving this loose at this time. Now we're going to talk about what we need to do to get the actual feet onto this rack next. Now that all the load bars are tight, we're going to go ahead and mount the feet to the rack itself. We have to do this in a pretty specific manner, so I need you guys to pay extra special attention here. I've gone ahead and staged all of the hardware. This is going to be your hardware out of bag 8001.4. It says feet to rack. You're not going to use all the hardware in that bag. You're going to have leftover bolts. You're going to have leftover bolts in a lot of these bags because everything that we send is now a master hardware kit, so our packing team can get the racks out faster to you guys. With that being said, gone ahead and taken this foot. It's the 1328. There's 4 of them in your kit. I've staged that on the 6th load bar, the 4th load bar on both sides with 2 bolts, 2 washers, and 2 nylocks. And those bolts are also set up with washers. So if you're counting, it's 4 washers per side, 2 bolts and 2 nylocks, or I guess I should say per foot, not per side. And then at the front, we've got those feet as well with a bolt and a washer, another washer, and a nylock ready to go. I'll have Dave swing around over here and we'll talk about the alignment on the rack itself. Just so you guys are aware, I'm using 2 1/2-inch wrenches as well to connect all of this. What we're going to do is we're going to take a bolt and we're going to stick that through the foot with the threads facing the inside portion of it. And then from there, I'm going to connect it to the outside of the rack. The foot is more or less going to land between your armor and your groove tech. From there, I'm going to put a washer on the back of each of these bolts. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a nylock on here until the nylon starts to engage. And then you can tighten these, but we do not want to tighten them fully yet. So I'm going to go ahead and get a wrench on it. And what we are looking to do is tighten these to, let's call it about 90%. I need them to wiggle back and forth just a little bit, but I don't want them to be loose. So right there with 1 bolt tight, that wiggle is pretty good. I'll go ahead and tighten this one as well to about 90%. And I've got a little bit of wiggle there, get just a bit more, and that's good. Just a tiny bit of wiggle. We'll do that same process at the midfoot as well. It's going to be identical, so that's why I'm going to skip over to this front foot. That extra special attention I was telling you guys about pertains to this front foot. The 1329 has a slot on both sides of it, so we have a longer slot and a longer leg on one side and a shorter slot and a shorter leg on the opposite. The shorter leg, shorter slot is going to be what actually mounts to the rack itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our foot, our bolt loaded with a washer, we're going to stick that bolt through here, and then we're going to stick the bolt and the foot on the outside of the rack, just like we did for the middle and the rear foot. And then we'll come in here we'll add our washer and our nylon. And then at this point, like we did again for the front and rear feet, we want to tighten this guy to about 90% here. Make sure your wrench is going the right direction. And what we're looking for is a little bit of wiggle. We don't want a whole lot of side to side though, so as long as it can go up, down, and articulate, we're good to go. I'm gonna leave it at that point, maybe just a little bit more. From here, we're gonna talk about adding our armor to the sides. We can go ahead and put those handles on as well. If you haven't tied your handles yet, now's a really good time to pause, go watch our additional video on how to tie grab handles, and then we'll rejoin and talk about the next steps. All right, at this point, we have our armor ready to go. We have our grab handles ready to go, and we have our hardware to connect all of these items also ready to go. The hardware for this section is going to be 2 bags. So you're going to have your grab handle hardware in 8001.6. Those are going to be 55 millimeter M8 bolts, lock washers, and the 212 black spacers. And then we're also going to have the hardware out of 8001.5. It's labeled Armor to Groove Tech. These are 35 millimeter bolts, lock washers, and spacers. I've gone ahead and set this up kind of like I did with the load bars and the Groove Tech earlier. So I have my 35 mil and my lock washer, and I have 1 spacer ready to go at the rear and also at the front. And then I've gone ahead and tied the handles per that video that I talked about just a minute ago. And I've got my 55 mils with lock washers loaded into the lace plates and 4 spacers ready to go. You might notice that our armor has a big hole in it now. We've gone ahead and cut the scene pod mounts out of the armor because again, this customer is going to be doing that lighting. So I've gone ahead and removed those to make this process a little bit easier. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and start the first and last bolt. So this last bolt here is right at the tail end. You're going to drop your bolt with lock washer through there. You're going to go ahead and put your spacer on the back side, and then you're going to line it up to that final riv nut that's installed in the Groove Tech at the back. Brace the front end of it while you're doing this, and then we'll move over to the front. And at the front, you've got 3 holes. So these 2 that are on that front leading edge, leave those open. Those are for your fairing. We're going to use this 3rd one that's a little bit further back. Go ahead and put your bolt with your lock washer through there, your spacer, and then we'll go ahead and get that started here by hand. So that's now hanging on. We can go back and do our handles at this point. So we'll go ahead and put 1 spacer on either bolt for that lace plate. And then we're going to go ahead and put it through the first holes in the armor. You don't want to insert them the whole way because we need to also get spacers on here. And I'm just going to hold that spacer in place, push that bolt through to hold the spacer, get the spacer in place, push the bolt through to hold that spacer. And because you've got your handles in the way, you'll probably need a wrench to get these started. I'm using a 5 millimeter Allen. That's what you guys will need as well. Just get a few turns on there, make sure it won't come out. And then we'll repeat that same process here for this last handle. So I'm gonna go ahead, again, just kind of rest it there. And then pull out on the armor slightly, put your spacer in place, push your bolt through the spacer, and then we'll go ahead and get a few turns started here. Now, because these are the last bolts that I have to do on this side, I can go ahead and tighten these down fully. We're going to go back and tighten all these bolts fully. But at this point, we just want to go ahead and get them all snug down. We'll give you torque specs for everything at the end of the video, but we want to make sure that they are tight enough to do what we need to do. Going to go ahead and tighten this down as well. And then I'll go back and do the other handle in the first bolt. We'll repeat this process on the opposite side. Now I'll give you one disclaimer. If you are going to be installing one of our quick wire harnesses, you probably want to go ahead and put your quick wire on the Groove Tech before you put your armor in place. I'm going to have to go back and take this off, but for the sake of doing this video, I just want to show you what this looks like without a wiring harness installed. Again, if you are putting that quick wire in, you want to do that prior to putting the armor and the handles in place. Quick wire is all attached to Groove Tech, and that's going to be the easiest way for you to go about doing this, and then you can do this process, adding your armor and adding your handles. So At this point, I'm going to go do the same thing on the opposite side with the handles and the armor. And then from there, we're going to talk about adding the base feet to this. And then we'll put it on the truck, mark our holes, and get ready to drill. Now that we have the armor and the handles installed to the side of the rack, we're going to go ahead and put our front windscreen in. I've grabbed the hardware out of bag 8001.3 that says Windscreen. What you're going to have in there is some button head bolts and some nylon lock nuts. I'm going to go ahead and grab one of these for now, rock this fairing forward, insert that bolt through the outside here, and then you're going to line up the flanges that are on the side of the fairing and push that bolt through. And then you'll hop over to the other side while that bolt is kind of holding everything in place. Wiggle your fairing in, and then with that bolt, you'll go ahead and slide the bolt through the armor and then into your fairing. And just be patient with it. You might have to wiggle it around a little bit. And then from there, you can get the alignment right. Throw your other bolts in, hop over to the other side, throw your other bolts in, and now it's holding itself in place, but we still need to add our lock nuts. So I'm just going to go over here, and like everything else, we're going to hand thread those on just to start here. And then once you have these all hand threaded on, you can go ahead and take your 13mm wrench, your 5mm socket, and give these a good tighten down. So these you can go ahead and fully tighten in place. Absolutely no problem with that. Snug is good. Like I said, torque specs at the end of the video will be included. And then once you finish this process on one side, hop over to the other side, make sure that you've tightened that down as well. Be sure to drop your wrench a couple times. It really does add to the fun factor of this install. All right, the last step that we need to talk about before we put the rack on the vehicle to mark our holes for drilling is putting the bases to the feet on the rack itself. So at the front, we're going to use that one stud base. We're going to go ahead and take that stud. We're going to throw the provided 1/2-inch washer over it. And then we're going to put that stud through the bottom of the foot, a fender washer, and then we're going to go ahead and hand tighten a nylon locking nut and just leave it like that. Moving back to the middle foot, we're going to grab our 2 stud base. Again, we're going to throw a spacer over each of those studs and then line that up to the slots in our other mounting feet. A washer on both of those studs, and then a nylon locking nut. And this hardware is going to come in 2 separate bags. Both of them are going to be unlabeled as they are specific to this Raptor, but what you'll be looking for is a bag full of spacers and then a bag full of washers and nylon locking nuts. At that point, we'll go ahead, we'll do the rear foot, we'll do everything on the opposite side. My truck's been sitting out in the sun for a little bit, so I'm going to pull it in the garage. I'm going to let it cool off here for a couple of minutes so I don't burn myself on the nice dark metallic paint. And then we'll talk about putting the rack on the vehicle, marking the holes for drilling, and then we'll have to pull the rack off so we have enough clearance to drill those holes and install the bases back to the truck. Now that the rack is fully assembled, I've grabbed a friend and I've put this on the truck. I did not use my magician levitation skills to get it up here. I grabbed a friend. We are standing on stands right now. I'm not this tall. I'm on about a 2-foot workbench, and I recommend you guys do something similar or you're gonna need more friends. This is not particularly heavy, but with the size of these trucks and how wide they are, you either have to have like go-go gadget arms or some combination thereof. But nonetheless, what we're doing here is, now that we've got the bases attached to the feet, we're putting this on the truck. We've got this in the rough position that we want. I've already looked at it a couple times now, so it's sitting exactly where I want it, and I want to talk to you where that is. So when we're sliding it forward and backwards, what we're looking for is actually the gapping that's on this fairing here. If we come down a little bit, we can see we've got a pretty consistent gap of about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. That is more than enough space to allow for, you know, the air to pass under it without creating some sort of crazy howl. And it's not going to hit the roof either if it gets bonked by something. From there, all we really need to do at this point, once we've got it sitting here, is just mark the holes. We use a long marker called a pica. You can find them on Amazon. They're a little pricey. They're probably, I don't know, 15 to 20 bucks. And you're gonna wanna obviously use a color that's gonna stand out on your paint. I'll use a black one because it'll shine well enough here. But then all we're gonna do is basically mark the tiny little rivet holes that are in our base plates the whole way down on both sides of the vehicle. And the only consideration you really need to take into effect is the middle and rear feet, they sit flat, but these front feet, they articulate a little bit. So when you're moving these around, you wanna make sure that your stud is sitting flush on the front, and you also have that base plate sitting flush. That way you're only drilling these once. Common mistake with these racks is you drill them a little too far forward and the foot does not align. I've done it myself, learned from my mistakes. So all you need to do is just wiggle this foot around, make sure that it is sitting where you want it. You can rivet it in there and you're good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark these holes. We'll pull the rack back off and then we'll talk about drilling. All the holes are marked for the feet. I've actually gone ahead, I've pulled the rack back off the truck. This truck has a camper shell on it, so I just slid it back and put it on the load bars that were already on that camper shell to get it out of my way. If you guys have a tonneau cover, you could take it off the back and put it on the tonneau cover as well. That way you don't have to move it quite as far. Otherwise, you'd probably be best off just taking it back, putting it on the table like you had before when we were assembling it. But now that everything's out of the way, I can see all of the holes that I marked to drill this roof rack. So I'm gonna take the camera, flip it around here, and I've got a hole here and I've got a hole here. You might be saying, well, Drew, this has 3 spots to rivet it. Yes, it does, but I just marked the outer holes. That way when I go to drill these, all I have to do is just go fill that other hole back in, because I can drill it, rivet, and then drill it and rivet in here, and then that way I know everything's gonna line up. So as far as the drilling process goes, I have my drill, I have the provided 3/16 drill bit, and I've gone ahead and put a stop collar, which is also provided on that drill bit. I've set the depth to about 1 inch. That's gonna be more than enough to get through the roof without doing any damage. The nice thing with these F-150s and the Raptors is you actually have an extra layer of protection as well, because there's another layer of sheet metal just under the skin of the roof that will prevent you from puncturing any airbags, wiring, anything like that. So what I'm gonna do now, just angle this camera down for you guys here so you can kind of see where I'm working. And the feet can move around in these tracks a little bit. Those holes give you a good general guideline, but that's not to say that they're going to be perfect. There is a weather stripping, or I guess I should say a seam sealer, that comes from the factory that gets painted over, that's almost identical to the width of this foot. And what we like to do here is install these feet in the middle of the drip rail, which in most cases is also going to be the middle of that seam sealer that's applied from the factory as well. You don't want to put it too far in or too far out. The feet have adjustment that are mounted to the rack so they can slide left to right on these studs. So you want to kind of be in the middle of that window. That way you can fine tune your adjustments. So I like where that is sitting. I'm going to hold this in place really quick just so I can mark my holes with the drill bit. And all I'm doing there basically is I'm scuffing that seam sealer, but I know now exactly where I need to drill. So from there, I can actually go ahead and go. And we're just gonna start off slow here. We're gonna dig through that rubber seam sealer, and then we're eventually gonna get to the aluminum roof skin. And drilling is quite that easy, guys. You can see I didn't max out that stop collar. That's because of that second sheet of sheet metal in there, which is fine. We don't need to go any further than this. You don't have to go all the way down to the stop collar. You'll feel it break through. Once you've done that, you're good to go. So let's drill those other 2 holes. Okay, so we've drilled all 3 holes for this base plate. Next, we're gonna go grab our rivets. I like to drill and rivet each foot one at a time. So I'm gonna drill this foot completely, rivet this foot completely. Then we'll go to the next, and so on and so forth. So I'm gonna go ahead, get my stuff so I can clean this shavings and aluminum and everything off the roof. Then I'll get my rivet gun and the rivets that we provide. Okay, so at this point, those holes are drilled. I've cleaned the aluminum shavings and seam sealer out of the way. I now have my rivet gun. Ours is a Mac Tools. It has a fancy little swivel head. You guys don't need anything this fancy. Any rivet gun with a 1/8 inch mandrel, which is the shank size on the rivets that we provide, is gonna be more than fine for you guys. So what we're gonna basically need to do next is set up the rivet in the gun. So to do that, you'll have your 1/8 inch mandrel installed. You'll then take your rivet and put the side that looks like a nail into the gun. And then from there, you're gonna line it up to your hole in the actual foot. And then you'll line it up to the hole in the roof. And that seam sealer might cause a bit of a bind, so you can use a little rubber mallet here and you can just tamp that in place. Now, with that being said, when these guys go down, the rivets don't fully seat themselves right away. The reason that is because these rivets actually flare to look kind of like a peeled open hollow tip round, if that's, if you guys are shooters at all. So as you pull on these more, they're going to seat themselves more. So I'm gonna go ahead, do this one here in the middle. And the only thing you really wanna be mindful of when you're doing this is you wanna be pushing down. So as that rivet starts to pull, your rivet is then sinking down further into the roof itself. And the reason that we use this style rivet is because it flares really, really wide and gives us a really strong bite. So I got that through there. That rivet snapped off just like it should. And I already have a rock solid base just from that one connection. But as you know, we have 2 more to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this one here that's already installed. Go ahead and crunch that down. And you can quite literally watch this pull down into the seam sealer. It actually crushes the seam sealer a little bit as well, which at the end of the day is ultimately going to give you a little bit better weatherproofing as well. But we'll talk about weatherproofing here in just a minute. And then I've got one more to do. Angle that camera a little bit more for you guys. And again, this one's giving me a little trouble, so I'll just tamp it in place. That way I know that's seated. And then from there, we'll go ahead and start operating our rivet gun. And should get a snap here probably on this next pull. Okay, I've got this base fully installed, and you can see that that thing doesn't wiggle. In fact, I moved the truck so much that the camera started to fall over, but I caught it because I'm quick. Anyway, those rivets are all in. We're gonna go ahead and move to that next set of marked holes. I'm not gonna show you that because it's the same as this one. I'll touch quickly on that front foot as well here in a second, but I'm gonna go ahead and install that middle foot off camera, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about how to get this side and that side lined up even better than just marking your holes and drilling. Rear foot's installed, mid foot's installed. Now I need to do this front one stud. This only has 2 rivets on it. When I marked it, I marked the back hole and I just drew a little arrow for myself, notating that it needs to go forward of this hole. I've gone ahead and scored that as well with my drill bit. And just like the other 2, you want to make sure it kind of sits in the middle of that seam sealer. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to the side. I will re-drill, or I'll fully drill, I should say, those 2 holes that we've marked. And then we'll install the rivets just like we did everywhere else. After this, we're going to take a couple of measurements to make sure that we have the feet dead even from side to side. I'll touch on that next. All 3 feet are installed on the passenger side of the vehicle, which is where I'm standing right now. Like I said, I marked the holes on the driver's side as well, so I know they're going to be really close. But one step that I do to make sure that everything is as square as possible is I take some measurements. So at the back of your truck, there's a little rivet that is holding on a factory rubber drip rail. We're going to use that because it's going to be the same on both sides. That's gonna help us get everything square. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure to the last rivet on each of the plates that we've already installed. So rivet to rivet, how far is that? I didn't have any paper, so I grabbed a baggie and a Sharpie, and I'm gonna jot my numbers down on there. Your numbers are gonna vary slightly from mine, so please do not hold this as etched in stone, the law, and it can't be anything different. I will tell you what my numbers are, but again, yours might be different, plus or minus a 1/4 inch. Some of these trucks were built on a Monday, some of them were built on a Friday. Who knows who did it? And we just wanna make sure that we get it as even and square as possible. So from that rivet on the actual roof of the truck, and I'm gonna measure center to center, the first rivet for me is 5 3/8. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna jot that down. That's how far I need the rivets to be apart. Now, in order to keep the measurements manageable, I'm gonna measure from the front rivet of the last plate to the last rivet of the middle plate. So point to point, how close are those guys? So center to center again, I'm measuring, and those guys are 14 1/16 of an inch apart. So I'm gonna go ahead and jot that down. And then same process, I'm gonna measure from the front rivet of the middle plate now to the back rivet of the front plate. And I'm probably out of view here just a little bit, but I'm gonna go ahead and get that measurement. And that measurement shakes out to be 17 7/8 for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and take all my materials to the other side of the vehicle, and I'm gonna see when I put those holes, how close they align to these measurements. I want to probably use these measurements over the holes just because your eye's not gonna be perfectly straight, whereas a calculator, or I'm sorry, a tape measure is gonna be just as accurate as a calculator. So we wanna go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna grab my materials, move over to the other side, and then we'll talk about, again, how to apply these measurements with what we're using. Flipped over to the driver's side now. I've got my base lined up over the holes that I marked. And now all we want to do is just measure the center of this hole on the base plate to the center of the rivet that's on the truck and make sure that those measurements are the same on both sides. I had 5 3/8 on the passenger. Just want to double check that that's what I've got over here. And it looks like I'm really, really close. I'm going to leave that where it is. It is spot on, so I'll grab my drill. I'll hold my plate in place. And we'll just mark that seam sealer with our drill bit, basically. Once we've got those holes roughly in place. Sorry, I put the drill right in front of the camera. We can just go ahead and get that drill going. And then all we're doing on this side is just repeating that process. So I'm gonna drill these 3 holes, rivet these 3 holes, we'll move to the midfoot, take our next measurements, and so on and so forth. All of our mounting feet are now in place, they're riveted down. I'm gonna go ahead and prep these to accept the roof rack, which we're getting ready to put back on next. But before we do that, we need to take those spacers we used earlier, the little 1/2 inch, and just go ahead and drop those over every stud across the roof. And then we'll be ready to put the roof rack on and secure that with our hardware. So once again, I didn't use my levitating abilities to get the rack back on the truck. I had a friend help me. And all we did was we dropped the rack on top of the studs that we had riveted to the roof, making sure that that spacer that's provided was there as well. From here, we're gonna take that fender washer and those nylon lock nuts and go ahead and thread them back onto these studs, essentially connecting the roof rack to the truck. The only thing you really need to be mindful in this step is, like we've talked about earlier, the rack does have a little bit of side-to-side adjustment, and you just want to make sure that you are centered to your liking, to your visual. Fortunately, this one's a little bit harder to measure, so you really just got to kind of eyeball it. You know, do like the whole like one eye thing and, you know, walk back and forth 500 times. But once you've done that, which I've already done, you can go ahead and grab you can grab your 7/16 end wrench and start to tighten. I use a ratcheting end wrench just because it does make the job a lot easier, because you're gonna have to reach under a few of these load bars. And I just use a little stubby guy, because all we're doing really is just snugging these guys down. You do not need to put the farm arm on them. There are 10 bolts connecting this to the roof. And with those 10 bolts, you have, let's see, 3, 6, 9, 12, 16 rivets holding it down. So you're in really good shape. These racks are ridiculously strong. So yeah, we'll go through. We'll do that on the front, middle, and rear feet on every side. And then from there, your rack is installed. If you've got your lighting and wiring to finish up, do that now. But at this point, your Raptor rack is done. So we're good to go.